Hey guys, it's Libby and welcome to my reading wrap up for the months of both October and November. So yeah, I'm obviously out of practice from BookTube after my summer hiatus. I forgot to do a monthly wrap up. Also, the beginning of November, there was a lot on my mind. You know, I had some other things distracting me. And I plumb forgot. I think that's okay though, because I only got through 2 books in October, because one of them was 900 pages long. So yeah, it would have been a pretty short wrap up anyway, so I think it's fine to roll my Victober reading into my November wrap up. So my first Victober read was Middlemarch by George Eliot, which I picked for Katie's challenge, which was something along the lines of read a Victorian novel that is the same genre as your favorite genre for contemporary writing. I don't know what my favorite genre for contemporary writing is, so I decided it was literary because Middlemarch counted as literary and I wanted to read Middlemarch anyway. I know that George Eliot is a kind of divisive Victorian writer. A lot of people really love her, a lot of people do not enjoy her writing at all. So I really went into this book like expecting something meaningfully different from the things I've read by the Brontes, Thomas Hardy, Elizabeth Gaskell, and Anthony Trollope, and that did not happen. If you told me that Middlemarch was written by Elizabeth Gaskell, I would believe you. Middlemarch is set in the small town of Middlemarch from the years 1829 to 1831, during which the Reform Act somewhere in there got passed, which had to do with how people were represented in the English Parliament. If I understand correctly, previously the city of Manchester had had no representatives, and there were representatives from like rotten boroughs, which is where technically nobody lives. So yeah, we were due for reform, but it's mostly not about the politics, it's mostly about people's bad marriages. First, you've got Dorothea Brooke, who is a quite serious but also civic-minded 19-year-old who decides to marry a much older man who is working on, he's sort of been working on his graduate dissertation for the last 30 years, and everyone around her thinks this is not a very good idea. As it turns out, he maybe doesn't actually want a wife. He's too wrapped up in his thesis. And then you've got Dr. Tertius Lydgate. What a name. Ladies and gentlemen, name your children Tertius. Yeah, he's a doctor who's recently come to Middlemarch. He has, you know, it's your classic like, oh, slightly different opinions on how doctoring should be done. He marries just a really like fascinatingly infuriating woman who just like, she kind of just does whatever she wants to do, which is often spend money that they don't have on things, but also she's fascinating. George Eliot describes her as someone who thinks that it is good to do the right thing, but anything that I want to do, it has to be the right thing because I want to do it, and I wouldn't want to do it if it wasn't right, so I just do everything that I want all the time. This does not go great for her. So I am currently giving this 4 stars. I think it could work its way up to 5 stars. I did quite enjoy the prose. I went into it expecting a lot more like description that is not about like the characters' psyches. I think I expected a lot more like landscape description or interior design description or something, and I didn't, you know, maybe there was more, but I certainly didn't notice it. I've also found this, that when people talk about Thomas Hardy, who is my favorite Victorian writer, they often talk about how he does beautiful nature writing, and I'm like, guys, I am not paying attention to the nature writing. We got the messiest love square going on here in the A-plot. Was there a pretty tree? Sure. So that may just be a me thing and not a the book thing. But yeah, because there was like so much going on and a lot of characters, I think I needed a sort of like one read just to figure out what's going on, and then in my second read I will be able to actually appreciate it. So I would like to reread this one eventually, although I do not currently have any plans to do so. Reading Middlemarch has sort of opened me up to reading Daniel Deronda, which I expect I will like more than Middlemarch. I think a lot of people who didn't like Middlemarch are like it, but Daniel Deronda is still okay. So I was making myself read Middlemarch first so that I would eat my vegetables before having my Zionist dessert. Then my second read of October, which was for Kate's challenge, which, oh gosh, this was like 2 months ago, so if I'm remembering correctly, it was read a book, a work that you haven't read yet by one of your favorite authors. I think that was that. Victorian authors. So I read Wessex Tales by Thomas Hardy. The edition I read contained An Imaginative Woman, The Three Strangers, The Withered Arm, The Fellow Townsman, Interlopers at the Knap, and The Distracted Preacher. Thomas Hardy has 3 short story collections, and like different, some stories got like repeated between different ones, and I think some short stories only got published in periodicals. So if you want to like be a Thomas Hardy short story completionist, do check which editions you're reading if you are reading the collected collections of stories. So let's see, what did I think of these? I think I must have missed something in An Imaginative Woman, because I was rolling along with it and then the ending happened and I just fully didn't get it. I don't know how we ended up there. I should maybe reread the last couple paragraphs. The Three Strangers, I think, is like, it's peak non-romantic Hardy. It's like it's a quintessential Hardy without any of the romantic elements that he normally includes. So there's sort of, it's hard to talk about short stories without spoiling them. Let's just say a crime has happened, and we sort of figure out the guilty party, and there's stuff going on. But it has that like perfect blending of everything feeling like the outcome is determined by fate, as it was supposed to happen, by random happenstance, and by the characters' motivated actions. It feels like all of those things are true, which, like, when you get those, Thomas Hardy is somehow able to make that work sometimes, and it is delicious. Okay, then we've got The Withered Arm, which was a fun and kind of spooky one. It's about a woman who she's jealous of another woman. She has a dream that she like grabs this woman hard on the arm, and then when she meets this woman later in real life, the woman has like bruises appearing on her arm. Ooh. And then the other one that I enjoyed was The Distracted Preacher, which is actually about smuggling. And at the moment, I'm in the middle of reading Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. So I'm just learning all about smuggling in Cornwall. I gave Wessex Tales 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, now the books that I read in November. Many of these were for nonfiction November, although I did find a way to wiggle a little bit of fiction in there. So the first thing that I finished was Barracoon by Zora Neale Hurston. Some of it is Zora Neale Hurston's words, but a lot of it is Cudjo Lewis's words. Cudjo Lewis is one of the last men to survive the Middle Passage. So we start out hearing about his life in West Africa when his village is attacked by the king of Dahomey, and then they're sent on like a death march to the coast where he and some other members of his village or town are sold, and they go across on the boat. And they are eventually sold in, is it Mississippi or Alabama? I think it's Mississippi. And yes, there was a lot of really interesting stuff. I found it interesting how, because he had been born in Africa, he was actually treated very differently by slaves who had been born in the United States. Obviously, he doesn't speak English. He's also not Christian, and so like the other slaves kind of definitely looked down on him, and there's not a sense of solidarity. It's quite bleak. So he's narrating this in, I believe, 1928, when he's much older, and of course, He's been free for most of his life, and so we also hear about his life during the post-Civil War antebellum era in the South. So we get to hear about his family, and it gets really sad, guys. He has outlived his wife and all 4 of his children, and at one point he talks about how one of his sons died, where his son was just walking down the street and a policeman shot him, and that nothing happened to the policeman. And I was like, yeah, they will do that, won't they? But his narrative is broken up by some narration from Zora Neale Hurston talking about, like how, taking the train to go down to see him. They talk a lot about food. She gives him a lot of food to ply him to tell his story, and how sometimes he just doesn't want to talk to her. I think we all feel like, no, man, you have to tell your story for posterity and like be written about by this journalist. But I think it's fair for people to say, leave me alone. I don't want to talk about my life with you. I rated Barracoon 4 stars, and that was the Nonfiction November prompt discovery, because the book was not originally published during Hurston's lifetime. It was published in 2018. So the one that I read for time was The Gifts of the Jews, How a Tribe of Desert Nomads Changed the Way Everyone Thinks and Feels by Thomas Cahill. This is the second book in his Hinges of History series. I didn't love this. I think he didn't really demonstrate his thesis, and I think this maybe would have been better if he had not written such a thesis-oriented book. So the thesis is that the Jews in ancient Bronze Age times had a fundamentally different way of thinking about time than every other culture in the world, which is that they viewed it linearly rather than cyclically. So I had 2 main problems with this. First one is that he doesn't do a good job of demonstrating that nobody else thought like this. He does a good job of talking about how that the Jews did think like this, and he also talks about the Babylonians, largely referencing the Epic of Gilgamesh and how that demonstrates how the Babylonians thought about time, but he doesn't talk about anywhere else. And I'm like, there were a lot of civilizations that were thriving. And the other problem I had was that he takes a lot of evidence from the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, which is the Old Testament, but calling it the Old Testament implies that there is a New Testament. So when I'm just talking about it as an element of Jewish culture, I call it the Hebrew Bible. So the Hebrew, he uses that as like as his main source, because it is like the main written document that we have from these people. And it seems to be like really conveniently alternating between treating the stories in the Hebrew Bible as stories, which show us like how the storytellers viewed the world, and treating the stories as things that literally happened. And so the way, like, we can speculate on how the real people who are the characters of the stories like would have thought and felt, which, like, one, I don't think most of the stuff that is described in the Hebrew Bible actually happened, so you'd have to make a case for that first. And then, like, we didn't really get any delineation between, like, what he is presenting as things that actually happened and what he is presenting as things where, like, we can glean how they thought because of how they told stories. So I only gave this 2.5. I was kind of disappointed. Then I took a break from the nonfiction to read a little bit of fiction. I read The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. This is a mid-century Scottish novel. We're set in Edinburgh, and it's about a school teacher, Miss Jean Brodie. I'll drop the Edinburgh accent, who teaches at a girls' school, and it's about her and like one set of girls that she teaches. There's maybe 5 of them. And I don't know exactly how Scottish school systems worked, definitely not how they worked 100 years ago, but there's something to do with, like, when they're in the lower school, she's their main teacher, and so we see them when she is their teacher, and we also continue to see the girls when they move on to the upper school, and they are just like friends with her. I found this book weird. Miss Brodie's prime refers to the prime of her like dating life. So she was in love and possibly even engaged to a man who died during World War I. So she's kind of like living as a widow even though she has never been married. But that doesn't stop her from being like interested in other men, including some men who were married and like potentially having affairs with them. So there's a lot of like the girls sort of like figuring out, you know, who, like, is she sleeping with the art teacher or is she sleeping with the music teacher? Oh, they've both like coincidentally gone on vacation the same week. And then as they get older, she's like, yeah, no, it's actually one of the weirder parts when she's like, if I can't sleep with this married man, I want one of you to sleep with this married man. Weird. And also, I can't like remember any of the girls' names or any of their characters particularly. These were not well-drawn characters. One of them is clearly just like the dumb girl. Like that's her main character trait, is that she's dumb. She like, and it's not that that is the character trait that is attributed to her by the other characters. That is the character trait that is attributed to her by the book, by the author. So, you know, one, that's kind of mean. Two, it's kind of boring. So yeah, I only gave this a 2.5 stars as well. The reading was not great in November, I'll let you guys know. And that not greatness did continue with the Book of Speculation by Erika Swyler. This is another work of fiction that I read. Yeah, so based on, I bought this book based on the back cover text. I don't think I've seen anyone else on BookTube who has read it, and you know, shame on me for going out on a limb. Yeah, it's not that good. So there's two stories going on. I DNF'd this, so I don't know where we're ending up, but I assume that they at some point intertwine. One of them is about, it's set in the modern day, it's about a man who works as a librarian. He's in quite a small town, and the library isn't, you know, getting as many funds as it used to, so he's worried that he's going to get laid off. This means he won't be able to make the repairs on his house, which is like falling into the sea. And also there's like something up with his sister, who doesn't live with him. She's off being crazy in, I think, the circus. And also their mother committed suicide by jumping into the sea when they were children. And then there's this other story set in maybe I don't know, somewhere between 1760 and 1910 is when it's set. And it's about a mute boy who, you know, he's mute, so obviously things aren't going great at home. So he either runs away or he gets kicked out, and he joins a circus, and he sort of does this like wild boy act, and then he gets apprenticed to their like tarot card reader, and neither of these was particularly interesting. I think the main problem was that this is not weird enough for me. The place, you know, the books that I really like live in that gray area between literary and genre fiction. And I think this one just didn't have enough of the genre weirdness to hold my attention. Also, there are some sex scenes. Our librarian has a kind of girlfriend. And yeah, the sex scenes were badly written. I'm gonna throw down here, guys, and say that romance novel sex scenes are better than literary fiction sex scenes. And I've just been spoiled. Literary writers either don't do it or step up your game. The next book that I finished is one that I do have a physical copy of, but it is on long-term loan to both my aunt and my mom, so who knows when I'll get it back. And that is Because Internet by Gretchen McCulloch, which is about, what is the subtitle? Understanding the New Rules of Language. So this book wasn't quite what I expected. It's about 275 pages long, and I was expecting a like linguistics of the internet. And it takes 100 pages for us to get to the linguistics of the internet. The first chapter I found to be kind of meandering. The second chapter was devoted to her typology of types of internet people, which then gets referred to throughout the rest of the book. And I found this extremely unintuitive, the way that she named groups. So there's 3 waves, like when people got on the internet. You know, was it in like the 80s and early 90s? Was it in like the late 90s, 2000s? Or was it like, you know, post Facebook? And then within the waves, there's different categories. There's like old internet people, full internet people, pre-internet people, post-internet people, and semi-internet people. And I had a really hard time keeping track of which was which. It had to do with like, how old were you when you got on the internet and what types of things were you using the internet for? I didn't really feel like I fit into any of these particularly well. I think as I was on like the tail end of, I don't know. I think I'm mainly a full internet person, but I caught like the tail end of whatever the one before that is. Yeah, so that kind of slowed me down. I wonder if you were going to read this, I might just suggest starting with chapter 3. I also found that, especially in chapter 1, it got a little bit better in chapters 3 through, I think 6 is the last one, that a lot of what she was saying was like quite obvious. Like she would explain a phenomenon and then she would explain why that phenomenon is happening. And I basically never needed her to explain why the phenomenon was happening. And I have taken a course in linguistics. I've also studied a bunch of dead languages, which involves like this. You kind of have to know linguistics in order to study dead languages because it's very grammar focused. And yeah, I've read other books on linguistics. And I actually don't think that any of that is why I found these things to be obvious. It wasn't like, oh, you know, I already know about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I don't need this to be explained to me. I feel like the thing she was presenting, it is really obvious is really easy to understand what's going on, even if you don't have a background in linguistics. So yeah, I was kind of disappointed in this. I gave it 3 stars, like a 3.25, you know, it's sort of like friendly and approachable. I wouldn't really recommend that you read this though, which means I don't think there really is a good book on the linguistics of the internet. You may have to go into like more academic subject matter if you want to enjoy that. Okay, next book. Also linguistics. I did like this one. Things are about to turn up, guys. Is this the last book I'm talking about? I think it is. Yeah, it is. So we ended the month on a high note. I actually finished this on December 1st. Close enough, though, I'm talking about it in my December wrap-up. So this is Our Magnificent Bastard Tongue, The Untold History of English by John McWhorter. I'd already read Talking Black by John McWhorter last year for Nonfiction November, and I also love his podcast, Lexicon Valley, so I knew I was pretty safe with this one. So this is really interesting and told me a lot of things that I didn't already know. So English, I already knew a lot about sort of the development of the vocabulary, how like a lot of, there's sort of 3 main sources for English vocabulary. German, which came with the Anglo-Saxon, like primary speakers of Old English, and then French from the Norman invasions, and then Latin from the Christian invasion, if you want to think of it that way, from the fact that the only people who were like literate in the Middle Ages were monks who were writing in Latin and also Greek. And this book does mention those things, but this is really a history of the grammar of English rather than a history of the vocabulary of English. So we spent a lot of time on the influence that Celtic had on English, and then also a fair bit on Norse, because from the Viking invasion. So obviously in the British Isles, before the Anglo-Saxon invasion, you had the Celts. Britain was a Roman colony or a Roman province for a time, but it seems like the Latin didn't really filter through and most people were still speaking Celtic languages. So you get to see a lot of comparisons between English and Welsh. So the primary piece of evidence is our weird aspect system in English. So if you are an English speaker and you've ever learned a foreign language, you've probably, unless it was Welsh or Cornish, you've probably been confused by the fact that there's one present tense and you can't say I am walking or I do walk, as opposed to the simple I walk. In French, it's just je marche. And there is no je suis marchand. That would not make sense. So that actually comes from Celtic. And John McWhorter's specialty is Creole languages, which develop from Pidgin. So Pidgins are a contact language. They're a language that develops when adults have to learn a foreign language very quickly. So this happens in like areas with a lot of trade, the light just turned on, like in Indonesia, come on. And also when there's invasion or slavery, so you've got like gullah, I think is a type of pigeon. Okay, the light has decided that it wants to turn on now. So pigeons are created by adults who are less good at learning foreign languages as children, or less good at learning languages as children. So it's normally like a simplified language with a smaller vocabulary inventory and simplified grammar. However, you can't really have a whole language with that limited inventory of words and grammatical features. So when children learn how to talk from their pidgin speaking adults, they add features and they add vocabulary, and that gives you a Creole. So because that is his background, John McWhorter is very good at seeing how does contact language affect the language that provided the contact. Is that making sense? So basically, the Celts got invaded by the Anglo-Saxons. Celtic people had to start speaking Old English very quickly, and they didn't do it quite right. They included a lot of features of their own languages. And then the type of English that the Celts were speaking influenced Old English. And they kind of have a similar thing going on with the Viking invasions later. And then the final chapter is a different conspiracy theory time. It actually moves before English to Proto-Germanic, which is the ancient language from which English, the Scandinavian languages, Dutch, and German are descended. And John McWhorter is actually tracing some tentative connections between that and Phoenician, because English is very weird. It's weirder than the rest of the Germanic languages are to each other. But Proto-Germanic is actually weirder than other Indo-European languages in Europe are to each other. And so one possible explanation, which is also supported by elements of archaeology, including Phoenician pots being found sunk in ships near Denmark. He's talking about how the Phoenician language, which is a Semitic language, potentially could have influenced pronunciation and even grammar in Proto-Germanic. So that one's a little bit more tentative, but certainly fun. So I really enjoyed this book. There is something quite notable about the writing style, which is that John McWhorter is clearly writing with a chip on his shoulder, thinking that other historians of English are just ignoring or dismissing the connections between English and Celtic languages and English and Old Norse. And he is clearly trying to stick it to them. Since this is a work of pop nonfiction as opposed to academic writing, I'm not really sure why he's doing this, because he's not writing to his fellow linguistics professors. He's writing to normal people, so I wasn't bothered by that, but I can see someone else being bothered by the fact that he's so obviously writing with a chip on his shoulder. Anyway, I gave this 5 stars. I really liked it. It's also short. So that is it for my wrap up of both October and November. Moving forward into December, So here's the thing, guys. I need to read something along the lines of 25 more books this month in order to get to my Goodreads goal, which is 70 books, because I took this summer off from life. And I kind of have this wild theory that I will maybe do that. So in December, I may massively fail at this, or we may have a giant wrap up at the end, or I may do like a halfway through, a midpoint wrap up. Yeah. So we'll see you guys soon. Also, yeah, expect some more Shakespeare content before we get back into the Bard Book Club. Anyway, enough teasing. See you later.